My wife stood in the middle of our backyard holding a champagne glass she couldn't drink from, tears streaming down her face as she told 40 people we were having a baby, and I smiled like I didn't already know the child wasn't mine. I work as an industrial safety inspector, which means I spend my days identifying risks before they become disasters, calculating failure points in systems that look perfectly stable from the outside. And right then, I was watching my marriage collapse in slow motion while everyone around me celebrated. Madeline had this glow about her that everyone kept commenting on. Her sister Lauren kept hugging her and crying, and I stood there with my arm around her waist thinking about the audio recording on my phone that proved she'd been sleeping with her boss for 7 months. The thing about discovering betrayal is that you get this choice in the first few seconds. You can either detonate everything immediately, or you can go cold and methodical. And I've always been the kind of person who documents everything before making a move. She announced the pregnancy on a Saturday afternoon in late September with decorative balloons tied to our fence and a cake that said, exclamation point. Baby makes 3, in blue frosting. And I had known for exactly 11 days that she was carrying someone else's child while planning to put my name on the birth certificate. It started the way these things always start, with something small that didn't quite fit. I came home early from a job site in mid-August because the concrete pour got delayed, and Madeline's laptop was open on the kitchen counter still logged into her email. I wasn't snooping, I was just walking past and saw a message preview that said, "Last night was incredible," from someone named Derek, and my brain did this weird thing where it tried to make it innocent for about 5 seconds before reality crashed in. I didn't confront her. I didn't even let my expression change when she came downstairs 20 minutes later asking about dinner. I just filed it away and started paying attention to things I'd been ignoring for months. She'd been staying late at work twice a week since March. She'd changed her phone password in April. She'd started going to meet a personal trainer at weird hours and coming back without looking like she'd actually worked out. And I'd explained all of it away because I wanted to believe my wife wasn't the kind of person who'd do this. I spent that first week just watching her, noting the patterns, and she had no idea that I was running a completely different calculation than the one she thought we were both working from. I pulled her phone records through our shared account on the 4th day, and there were hundreds of texts to a number that wasn't saved in her contacts going back to February. She deliberately kept it unsaved, probably thinking that if I ever glanced at her phone, a random number would look less suspicious than a saved name. But that kind of operational security only works if your husband isn't the type to cross-reference timestamps with his own calendar. Every single time she told me she was working late or meeting Lauren for drinks or going to visit her mom, she'd sent or received messages from that number within the same hour. Derek turned out to be Derek Hammond, her direct supervisor at the marketing firm where she'd worked for 3 years, married with 2 kids based on his LinkedIn profile, and apparently comfortable enough with the affair to use his personal cell phone for it. I created a folder on my personal laptop that she didn't know existed, started saving screenshots with metadata timestamps, and built a timeline that showed exactly when this thing had started and how it had escalated. The messages from March were cautious and flirty. By April, they were explicit about meeting at hotels. By June, she was telling him she loved him. And by July, they were talking about how they wished they could be together openly, if only their situations were different. I recovered deleted messages using a backup program I installed on our home computer that she synced her phone to every night. And that's where I found the real damage. She'd told him in early August that she was pregnant, and they'd had this whole conversation about whether it was his or mine based on timing. And she'd literally said the chances were about 70-30 in his favor, but that it didn't matter because I'd never questioned it. There were messages about how I was stable and reliable and would be a good father, about how she couldn't leave me right now because I made twice what Derek did and her lifestyle would take a hit, about how maybe in a few years when his kids were older they could figure something out, but for now this was the practical choice. I read those messages sitting in my car outside a job site during lunch break, and I remember feeling this cold clarity settle over me like I was reading an incident report about someone else's life. She'd calculated the whole thing, run the numbers on keeping me versus leaving me, and decided that I was the better financial option even if Derek was the one she actually wanted. We'd signed a post-nuptial agreement 2 years earlier when I inherited money from my grandfather, something she'd agreed to easily at the time because she said she'd never want my family's money anyway. And now I understood that agreement was going to be the thing that protected me from losing everything. The pregnancy announcement came 3 weeks after I found the first message, and by then I'd already met with a lawyer named Reeves who specialized in cases involving paternity fraud. He told me that audio recordings were legal in our state as long as one party consented, which meant anything I recorded in my own vehicle or home was admissible, and that if I could prove she deliberately misrepresented paternity, I'd have a strong position in divorce proceedings. Madeline sometimes borrowed my truck when her car was getting serviced or when she needed to haul something, and I knew her car was scheduled for an oil change that Wednesday. I installed a voice-activated recording app on an old smartphone, charged it fully, wrapped it in black electrical tape, and wedged it under the passenger seat of my truck on Tuesday night. She took my truck Wednesday morning like I knew she would, and I got exactly what I needed that afternoon when she called Derek during her lunch break, and they talked for 11 minutes. He'd asked if she was sure about going through with it, and she'd said, exclamation point. It's his. I'll put my husband's name on everything. And honestly, Derek, this is better for everyone because Caleb will never leave once there's a kid involved. She talked about me like I was a safety net she was actively exploiting, like my commitment to her was just another resource to be managed. And I listened to that recording 3 times after I retrieved the phone that evening to make sure I wasn't misunderstanding anything before I saved it to 4 different cloud services and sent a copy to Reeves. I went to the backyard party knowing exactly what I was going to do, but not when I was going to do it, because timing matters when you're planning to detonate someone's entire life. Madeline kept touching her stomach and smiling at me like we were sharing this beautiful secret. Her parents kept talking about grandchildren and how proud they were, and I played the role of excited father-to-be while mentally reviewing every piece of evidence I collected. I had screenshots organized by date. I had phone records highlighted and annotated. I had hotel receipts I'd pulled from her credit card statements. And I had that audio recording that proved she knew the baby probably wasn't mine and had decided to trap me anyway. I called Reeves from my truck on the way home from the party and told him I was ready to move forward. And he said he'd have the divorce papers ready to file by Monday morning and that the evidence package I'd built was one of the most thorough he'd seen in 20 years of family law. She wanted to announce at the backyard party she wanted everyone to see us as this perfect couple starting a family. And I let her have that moment because I knew it would make what came next hit even harder. She thought she was trapping me with a pregnancy that would lock me into 18 years of supporting another man's child. But she had no idea that I'd spent the last 3 weeks building a case that would leave her with nothing and expose exactly what kind of person she really was. This first part shows something crucial about betrayal in real life. It's not the dramatic explosion you see in movies. It's cold documentation that protects you when emotions would destroy you. Notice how he turned his professional training into survival strategy, treating devastation like a job that needs precise execution. The second backyard party happened 3 weeks after the first one, and Madeline had no idea it would be the last time most of these people would ever speak to her again. She'd wanted to do a gender reveal this time because apparently one public celebration wasn't enough, and she'd spent days planning this elaborate setup with colored smoke bombs and a photographer she'd hired to capture everyone's reactions. I told her it was a great idea and even helped her arrange the tables. And the whole time I was running through my plan like I was conducting a final safety inspection before a controlled demolition. Reeves had filed the divorce papers that morning, but they wouldn't be served until Monday, which gave me exactly 1 weekend to make sure everyone who mattered knew the truth before Madeline could spin her own version of events. I'd loaded the audio recording onto a Bluetooth speaker I'd hidden in the garage. I'd printed copies of the most damning text messages in a folder inside my truck, and I'd rehearsed exactly what I was going to say until it felt like reading a technical report instead of destroying my marriage in front of 40 witnesses. She wore this white sundress that showed off her small bump and kept saying how grateful she was that everyone could make it on such short notice. And her mom kept fussing over her like she was made of glass while her dad talked to me about setting up a college fund. Derek wasn't there because Madeline had specifically told me she didn't want work people at family events, which was darkly funny considering she'd been sleeping with her work person for almost 8 months at that point. Tyler showed up early and caught my eye from across the yard, and I told him 2 days earlier what was about to happen because I needed at least one person there who wouldn't think I'd lost my mind. One of Madeline's co-workers named Logan had also shown up with his girlfriend, and I made a mental note that he was going to witness this entire thing and take it back to the office, which was exactly what I wanted. Lauren was running around with her camera taking candid shots. Madeline's parents were holding court near the food table, and I stood next to my wife with my hand on her lower back thinking about how she'd told Derek that I was too stable to ever suspect anything. The gender reveal was scheduled for 4 o'clock when everyone had arrived, and the lighting would be perfect for photos, and Madeline kept checking her phone for confirmation from the photographer. I'd sent her a text from a burner app number an hour earlier pretending to be the photographer saying I was running late due to an accident on the highway, and she kept refreshing her messages waiting for an update that would never come. She started getting anxious around 3:45, asking if we should wait or just go ahead without professional photos, and I told her we should just use Lauren's camera because these moments were about family anyway, and she bought it completely. Everyone gathered in a semicircle around the spot where we were supposed to set off the smoke bombs, and Madeline was practically vibrating with excitement as she explained that we'd both pull the tabs at the same time and find out together what we were having. I was standing there holding a blue smoke bomb that I had no intention of ever setting off, watching her smile at me like I was about to share the happiest moment of her life, and all I could think about was that audio clip where she called me a sure thing who'd never leave once there was a kid involved. I let her finish her little speech about how this baby was a blessing and how excited we both were, waited for the applause to die down. And then I said I had something I wanted to add before we did the reveal. The shift in tone was immediate because everyone could tell from my voice that something was off, and Madeline's smile got confused and tight around the edges as she looked at me trying to figure out what I was doing. I said that before we celebrated this pregnancy, I thought everyone should know that my wife had been having an affair with her boss Derek Hammond since February, and the baby she was carrying had a 70% chance of being his based on her own admission in text messages. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the neighbor's wind chimes 3 houses down, and Madeline's face went through this rapid progression of shock to panic to anger that would have been fascinating if it wasn't happening to someone I'd once loved. She started saying, exclamation point. What are you talking about? Have you lost your mind? But I was already walking toward the garage, and I could hear people murmuring behind me as I grabbed the Bluetooth speaker and connected my phone. The audio recording played for everyone standing in that backyard, Madeline's voice coming through crystal clear as she told Derek that the baby was his, but she'd put my name on everything because I'd never leave once there was a kid involved, and Derek really needed to stop worrying because she had it all figured out. I watched her face go white as her own words echoed across the yard, watched her parents' expressions collapse into confusion and horror, watched Lauren's camera drop to her side as she stared at her sister like she was seeing a stranger. Madeline tried to grab my phone, but I stepped back and let the recording keep playing through the part where she talked about how I made good money, and she wasn't about to give up the lifestyle for some romantic fantasy with a married man. Her mom made this wounded sound in the back of her throat. Her dad's face went completely blank, and I saw several people, including Logan, pull out their own phones to record what was happening because it was too surreal to just be witnessed. Logan was already typing something on his phone, probably texting other people from their office, and I knew by Monday morning everyone at that marketing firm would know exactly what Madeline and Derek had done. I turned off the speaker when the recording ended and said that I'd filed for divorce that morning, that paternity testing would be part of the legal proceedings, and that I wanted everyone here to know the truth before Madeline had a chance to rewrite history. She was crying and trying to say something about how it wasn't what it sounded like, how I was taking things out of context, but her own voice had just played for everyone telling Derek that she was deliberately trapping me with a baby that probably wasn't mine. Lauren was backing away from her sister like she was physically repulsed. Their mom was crying into their dad's shoulder, and I could see people near the back already heading for their cars because they wanted no part of whatever was happening. Tyler caught my eye and gave me this tiny nod, and I picked up my keys from the patio table where I'd left them specifically for this moment. I told Madeline that her stuff would be packed and ready for pickup by Tuesday, that all communication from this point forward needed to go through my lawyer, and that she should probably call Derek and let him know his wife would be getting some interesting information in the next 24 hours. The last thing I saw as I walked out of that backyard was Madeline standing alone in her white sundress with the unlit smoke bomb still in her hand, surrounded by people who were either staring at her or deliberately not looking at her, and I felt nothing except this cold satisfaction that she'd gotten exactly the public spectacle she'd wanted, just not the kind she'd planned for. I heard her calling my name as I got in my truck, but I didn't turn around, didn't give her the confrontation she was probably desperate for, and I drove to Tyler's apartment where I'd already moved half my important belongings earlier that week. She'd wanted everyone to see us as the perfect couple expanding our perfect family. She'd orchestrated this whole performance about love and commitment, and I'd let her have her stage right up until the moment I used it to show everyone exactly who she really was. Here's the key moment that defines everything. He used her own celebration as the platform to reveal the truth, which raises the question of whether public exposure crosses the line from justice into revenge. The level of control he maintained, from the fake photographer to having Logan there as a witness, shows exactly how calculated someone becomes after this kind of betrayal. I spent that first night at Tyler's apartment staring at my phone watching the messages pile up: 53 calls from Madeline, 22 from her mother, 16 text messages that started with apologies and ended with accusations, and I deleted every single one without reading past the first line. Tyler ordered pizza and didn't ask me how I was feeling because he already knew, and we sat there watching basketball highlights while my wife's entire life collapsed in real time across town. I'd blocked Madeline's number by midnight because the voicemails were getting increasingly desperate. Things about how we could work through this, and how the baby changed everything, and how I was being cruel by not even giving her a chance to explain. The thing she didn't understand was that I'd already given her dozens of chances over the 7 months she'd been sleeping with Derek. Every single night, she'd come home and kissed me and let me believe we were building something real, and I didn't owe her anything now except the legal minimum. Monday morning, I sent an email to Derek's wife, Natalie, using the contact information I'd found on her public Facebook profile, and I kept it simple and factual like I was filing an incident report. I attached screenshots of the messages between Derek and Madeline with timestamps. I included the audio recording, and I wrote exactly 3 sentences explaining that her husband had been having an affair with my wife since February and that I thought she deserved to know before making any decisions about her own marriage. She responded 6 hours later with just 2 words that said, "Thank you." And I found out later from Tyler, who knew someone in their neighborhood, that she'd called a locksmith before Derek even got home from work that day. Derek tried calling me twice that week, and I let both calls go to voicemail. And his messages were this bizarre mix of anger and pleading where he blamed me for ruining his family, while also trying to convince me that the affair hadn't meant anything serious. I saved those voicemails and forwarded them to Reeves because they were essentially admissions of the affair, and watching Derek scramble to control damage he'd caused himself was the closest thing to entertainment I had during those first few days. The HR investigation at Madeline's company started on Wednesday after Logan submitted a formal complaint about a supervisor having an inappropriate relationship with a subordinate, and he'd apparently included video footage from the gender reveal party showing the audio recording playing for everyone. Both Madeline and Derek were put on immediate administrative leave pending the investigation, which meant they were both home without pay while HR went through their work emails and found exactly what I knew they'd find. Company policy was clear about relationships between supervisors and direct reports, and the fact that they'd been using company resources to coordinate their affair made it even worse from a liability standpoint. They were both officially terminated on Friday afternoon, and I only know the timeline because Madeline sent me a long email about how I destroyed her career and her reputation over a mistake she'd made when she was confused and vulnerable, completely ignoring the fact that she'd spent 7 months deliberately deceiving me while planning to commit paternity fraud. I met with Reeves every few days to go over the divorce proceedings, and everything was moving faster than typical because Madeline's lawyer knew they had no leverage and was advising her to settle quickly. The paternity test was scheduled for after the baby was born, but we'd already established grounds for divorce based on adultery with documented evidence. And that post-nuptial agreement I'd mentioned was about to do exactly what it was designed to do. She was asking for the house and spousal support and half of everything. But Reeves had put together a case showing that she'd committed fraud by concealing the affair and deliberately misleading me about paternity. We offered her a settlement that gave her $20,000 and her car in exchange for a clean break with no spousal support and no claim to the house or my inheritance. And her lawyer convinced her to take it after explaining that going to trial would cost more than she'd ever recover and would involve all the evidence becoming public record in court documents that anyone could access. The divorce was finalized in early December, 11 weeks after the backyard party, and the entire hearing lasted less than 10 minutes because everything had been settled in advance. I walked out of that courthouse feeling lighter than I had in months. Not happy exactly, but free from the constant weight of pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Madeline tried to approach me in the parking lot, but I kept walking, and I heard her yelling something about how I'd never know if I'd thrown away my own child, but I didn't turn around because I already knew the answer didn't matter anymore. The baby was born in March, and I got a letter from her lawyer requesting paternity testing, but I filed a motion to dismiss based on the settlement agreement she'd signed that explicitly waived any right to establish paternity as part of the divorce terms, and the judge agreed without even scheduling a hearing. I ran into Lauren at a coffee shop in April, and she apologized for not reaching out sooner, said she'd been processing everything and trying to figure out what she could have missed in her sister. She told me Madeline was living with their parents and working retail because nobody in marketing would hire her after word got around about why she'd been fired, and that Derek had moved to another state after his own divorce went through. I thanked her for the information, but I didn't ask for details because I'd already moved on in every way that mattered, and I could tell she was looking for some kind of closure or forgiveness that I wasn't equipped to give her. I'd started seeing someone new named Sophie who worked in the scheduling department at one of my regular job sites, and she knew the basics of what had happened but didn't treat me like I was damaged or needed fixing. We'd been dating for 6 weeks, and it felt easy in a way that my marriage never had. No constant calculations or second-guessing. Just two people who enjoyed each other's company without the weight of betrayal hanging over everything. The Reddit post I eventually wrote wasn't about revenge or triumph or getting even. It was just about documenting what happens when someone tries to trap you and you refuse to be trapped. People in the comments kept calling me cold or calculating, asking how I'd managed to stay calm through all of it. And the truth was that staying calm was the only thing that kept me from falling apart completely. I'd loved Madeline enough to marry her and plan a future with her, and finding out she'd been using that love as leverage to secure her lifestyle had broken something fundamental in how I understood relationships. But I wasn't going to let her take anything else from me, not my house or my money or my sense of self. And playing it cold and methodical was the only way I knew how to survive losing someone I'd thought I'd spend my life with. I'm not the guy who got cheated on anymore. I'm just me, and that's enough. What this story demonstrates is that protecting yourself legally before confronting betrayal isn't cold, it's survival. Because once you reveal what you know, you lose control of the narrative unless you've already built your case. The lesson here is that when someone shows they're willing to destroy your life for convenience, documentation, and removing emotion from major decisions becomes your only rational path forward. So here's what I want to know. Was he wrong to expose her publicly instead of handling it privately? Or does planning paternity fraud forfeit your right to a quiet divorce? And does methodical self-protection ever cross into something darker? Or is there no line when someone's actively trying to trap you into raising another man's child? Let me know in the comments, drop a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more real-life stories.